Alright, since Brother Stan's voice is missing, he's asked me to help him as much as I can. I'm going to do as much reading and from both the verses and from his notes as I can. And then he'll do what he can. So this is new to both of us. I know it's new to all of y'all. So bear with us and we will see how this goes. If you've been here since he started, this is his third in his sermon series titled In Their Shoes. So if you are new and you're wondering why we have all these shoes up on our stage, that's why. And this comes from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. So if you're not there, you can go ahead and turn there. This says, "On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come.' His mother said to the servants, 'Whatever he says to you, do it.' Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, 'Fill the water pots with water,' and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, 'Draw some out now, and take it to the master of the feast.' And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, 'Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now.' This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." Let's pray real quick. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for allowing us all to once together in your house and to worship you and to dive into your word and to study that. Well, today's kind of been a weird day already, and this is going to be a little different for everyone here, but I want to pray that your spirit will be in here and that you will speak to the hearts of everyone here. And we love you in our prayer. Amen. So looking behind the scenes can be both interesting and informative. Today you can take a tour backstage at the Opry, visit the underground world of Disney, or even Google YouTube to see a little film about the making of your favorite movie. In fact, if your life was a movie, it would have a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. The things we most enjoy about movies and books, plot twists, character development, unexpected challenges, are the very things that we recoil from in life. But if we could see those events from God's viewpoint, we might react differently. Here are some truths to remember when these events happen. First, opportunities usually come dressed as interruptions.
Like this. When I was first pastoring, I tried to make out a schedule for my day. This is what I was going to do. And I never was able to follow the schedule. And I got super frustrated. It's so hard to do what you're planning to do when everyone else has a different agenda from you. But the most frustrating part about it all was that it appeared that God had a different agenda than I did. He was not reading and following my plan. And it's really hard when you're fighting against that. But I learned somewhere in those first couple of years that so often some of the best things of my day, the most productive, most fulfilling, and the most God-honoring were the interruptions. And I stopped seeing interruptions as a conflict with my schedule and started seeing those things as appointments from God. This passage is one of those interruptions. Jesus has been invited to a wedding. It's a wonderful event, exciting. But I will tell you that most pastors would rather do 10 funerals than one wedding. There's just so much pressure on that particular day. But usually families have planned and they've scheduled and they've done all these arrangements. They've got, the friends are invited, everyone's dressed the very best they can possibly be. And especially if you're going to have food, you know you got to have plenty of food. But at this wedding, they had a problem. They ran out of wine. That was the centerpiece of the food. What are we going to do now? And I'm certain that someone could have said, it's off. This is a terrible sign. This is worse than rain on your wedding day. We just need to quit and pack it up and go home. But they were home. They couldn't go home. They couldn't avoid this interruption in their schedule.
Doing good things doesn't mean there isn't something better to be done.
So the ones who were called upon to deal with this was, first of all, Mary. We don't know exactly what role Mary was playing here. She could have been the hostess. She probably was related to this family somehow, maybe an aunt or cousin. She had been called in to help, and Mary realizes that there is an issue. There's no wine. And so she turns to Jesus, her son, and she says, they have no wine. We're out. And then she has a conversation with him, and then she turns, of all people, not to the bride or the groom, not to the parents of either of those, but she turns to the servants. Now understand that these servants probably had already put in a lot of hours. Fact is, they may not have slept for the last 24, 48 hours. Everything has to be just right. I'm not sure, in my mind, I can't picture, are they slaves? Are they hired servants? Are they women? Are they men? Are they young? Are they old? The Bible doesn't tell us, and I can't find any reliable historical source to let us know. You know who they were? They're us. We are the servants. And she turns to the servants who have already been very busy doing good things, and she says, oh, whatever he says, he's the boss. That's what we're going to do.
Sometimes we avoid change because it's not my job.
So the servants could have readily said, hey, look, guys, this is not my work today. I've already been assigned. The boss, the bride, someone told me, you do this and don't stop doing it. But they didn't say that. They understood this is a crisis, and I need to be obedient in a crisis.
So the first truth is that opportunities usually come dressed as interruptions. The second is that some challenges are beyond our control.
So here's a problem that no one could fix. Mary couldn't fix it. The bride and groom couldn't fix it. How embarrassing would it have been? You've had planned for your wedding for a long, long time, and now you've miscalculated either too many guests or too little resources. By the way, someone has pointed out, and I don't know how accurate this is, that because Mary was invited, then Jesus was invited. That's two people. But because Jesus was invited, the disciples were invited. Now you make what you want of it, but here we've got 12 guys, and they're probably hungry and thirsty. That may be why they ran out of food. It may be why Mary turned to Jesus, because she might at least partially been blaming him. You brought all these hungry fishermen. Man, those guys got hollow legs or something. We can't fill them up. But the reality is, Mary was ready to admit, I can't fix this. And in their search for an answer, the smartest thing they did was they turned to Jesus. You may have come to church here today and you're looking for an answer. There's some problem in your life and you're trying to figure it out. And I'm just going to tell you, you can look all the other places that you want to. But your search will only end successfully when you look to Jesus.
We must be willing to admit there are needs we can't meet. If we only attempt what we are capable of doing in our own power, we never know the power of God.
Sometimes we retreat into changing our list of accomplishments, changing our schedule. So if we make out a list of things we want to do, and then at the end of the day we haven't done them, then we go back. I have found out how to make the perfect list of things to do. Is wait till the end of the day and make out a list of all the things that you did. Then you can check them off. But isn't that sometimes what we do? We really are afraid to really tackle the fact that our marriage is not what it ought to be. And so we pretend that the marriage that we have is the marriage that we want. We are so discouraged and disappointed with the job that we have that we pretend that, well, this is as good as I could ever get. We're so disappointed with the way the preacher preaches that we decide, well, I tell you what, I just won't even open my Bible. I won't study during the week. Then I'll be so hungry on Sunday that at least it'll sound good. And we can come at things from the standpoint of avoidance and just not dealing with them, but that's not honoring to God. What God says to us is, well, from another story in the scriptures, Peter, get out of the boat. That made no sense to a fisherman. Get out of the boat? Are you kidding? You get in the boat. And that's what we say sometimes to Jesus. I don't trust you enough to get out there into an area that I can't control. But until we do that, we really do not know the power of God. Until we are willing to attempt something that we look at square in the face and say, I am not sufficient for that thing, we don't know how powerful God is.
The third truth from this passage comes from verses 6 through 8, and it's that saying yes to an opportunity can often lead to a miracle.
Read that again.
Saying yes to an opportunity can often lead to a miracle.
So, I was trying to figure out how we were going to do this today. I knew I couldn't talk straight for any length of time. So I come in and I see Ben sitting there. I say, Ben, I need your help. Will you help me? He said the worst thing possible. He said, yes. He didn't know what he was saying yes to. But he's doing a marvelous job up here. Saying yes, it's okay. Yeah, you can clap for him. It's good. Good. Saying yes, just even a smallest yes, in the face of an opportunity, can lead to a miracle. So Mary says to the servants, whatever he says, do it. Jesus says to the servants, fill up these water pots. There's 6 of them, somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons capacity amongst the 6. These are big water pots. These are not just your little jugs that you carry on your shoulder. I'm assuming that there was some water in them. There would probably have been some, although perhaps a lot of it had been used. And I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life when I've realized that I've been used. My tank is getting low. And so Jesus says to these servants, he doesn't say throw the water pots out because they don't have much in them. And he doesn't say that about you either, friend. When you come to the point that you're at the end of your resources, Jesus does not say, well, he's got a hoarse voice today. Nobody's going to want to listen to that. Just cancel it. He says, no, he can do that. I can use that too. And some of you, I'm so sorry because this is just grating on your nerves. I understand that. It grates on mine too. But I woke up this morning and I couldn't even whisper. I knew something was wrong when I woke up about 4 o'clock and I coughed and there was no sound. I mean, literally, I could not make a sound this morning. And I just said, God, I don't know what you have in store for this day, but it's your day. Whatever it is. And Ben said yes.
Don't miss the blessing of simple obedience.
So they were told, fill these water pots. Now let's understand what that means. That does not mean go get the spigot and the hose and run it in the house and turn it on. The reason that there were water pots is that there was no water in the house other than what was in the container. There was no spigot, no faucet, no tap. There wasn't even one outside the house. They had to go a distance to get to that. There was a well, as we visited last week perhaps, or there was a spring, but there was some source of water, and it probably was in the vicinity of the town, but it would have been somewhat of a journey. And those servants, I'm glad it's plural because I'd hate to think of somebody doing it all by themselves. But those servants had to make a trip to get the water. And they couldn't haul 120 or 180 gallons at a time. They had to make multiple trips. And understand that this is under time pressure. You know what that's like when everybody's waiting on you. This miracle is waiting on them. They have to go get this water. And so they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Jesus just stands there. He doesn't send the disciples to help. I don't know about you, but I'm certain that some of us, at least me, I've been doing jobs thinking anybody could do this. Where is anybody? I don't know where anybody is. They've disappeared. I'm the only one doing this job. Surely somebody else could come along and help me do this job. Anybody could carry water. But there were no volunteers, just the servants. Maybe there were 2, maybe there were a half dozen, I don't know. I kind of think it was probably just a few. And the reason I think that is I'm kind of guessing that if you ran out of wine, it meant you weren't a rich household to begin with. So this is a poor family, I'm guessing. And they only have maybe a couple of servants, and they're running back and forth. And Jesus is just standing there. But John says this: they fill those water pots to the brim. I kind of got a feeling there was water running off on the floor when they got done. They didn't just pour some in there. They put as much as those vessels would hold. They just kept filling it up. Till Jesus said stop. Till he said whoa. They said we'll go. And they did. They just kept doing it. They were obedient in the most simple of things. You know, the reality is sometimes we as Christians get all caught up in the very big, difficult things. And we expect that that's where God gets glory. I will tell you something. There's a lady in this church, I'm confident, probably several ladies in this church, that every day, probably every morning, maybe before breakfast or just after, they get out their Bible and they read a love letter from God. And they pray for you. If for no other reason, you ought to come to Pardue because you get prayed for. But they just do that simple act. While a lot of us are trying to figure out what clothes we're going to wear or what we're going to do or how our schedule is going to get interrupted today, they're talking to Dad about you. It's that simple thing that makes all the difference in the world. I can't say that without remembering my grandma. My grandma was a wonderful cook, and if you don't mind me reminiscing just for a second, perhaps you'll be doing the same. My grandma was a wonderful cook. I don't know how she would do it. On Saturdays, I would help her. We'd catch a chicken in the yard, literally catch a chicken in the yard and kill it and pluck it. She would allow me that wonderful privilege of helping her as a little kid. But I knew that on Sunday what was going to happen. She'd come home from church. She wouldn't even change out of her clothes. She'd just put out of her dress. She'd put an apron on and she'd go in there and start the grease getting hot and she'd fry chicken. And I'd be in there trying to steal some. She had a way of cutting it where there was a little wishbone piece that came out of it. And I'd always try to steal that wishbone piece. If you've ever had that, you don't even know what good chicken is. We would eat that. But I want to tell you, as much as I enjoyed that meal, you know what I really liked for her to fix me? Some days after school, she lived right down the road from us, and I would go by, and she would make me a fried bologna sandwich. She would take that round bologna. That's called round steak, by the way. She'd take that round steak bologna, and she'd cut it. She put 4 little cuts on it. It looked like a what kind of cross that's called. But anyhow, yeah. So she'd fry that, put it. Oh my goodness! It was those simple things that I enjoyed then. And I think what we have forgotten is that God enjoys the simple things with us. He really enjoys it when we come to Him and say, Dad, I can't do this. Or I don't know how to do this. Or sometimes being really honest, I don't want to do this. He likes that simple stuff. Now just be simply obedient to Him and see what He'll do with that.
Being agreeable doesn't avoid the work.
So we built a conference center out at camp a while back, 40 by 80 building. It's the biggest building, most expensive building we've ever built out there. We had laid the concrete block for the basement, and we were getting ready to lay the floor joist across there, and they were kind of a truss style floor joist. Those of you who are in the building circles, you know what I'm talking about. 40 feet long. They stretched all the way across the building. And so I'm working there with a Hispanic group. Their primary language for communicating to one another was Spanish. The primary language for communicating to me was hand signals. You know, it was, hey, you do this, and I'm just kind of figuring this out. I'm like, I don't know. So they lay the floor joist out across there, and I noticed that we have one extra floor joist. And I realized I know what that's supposed to do. There's one wall in our building that stretches all the way across. It's the wall that separates the main auditorium from the kitchen and bathrooms. And so I knew we were going to double that floor joist because there's going to be a good bit of weight there on that. Well, I noticed that when they laid them out, which they did fairly quickly, just walking up and down the walls, they laid those out. They had the double on the wrong end. And so I called the foreman over and I tried to explain to him. And his favorite word, which it wouldn't have mattered, he could have said it in Spanish. It's one of the few Spanish words that I know. But his favorite word was yes. And so I said, I just wanted to point something out to you about this building. Yes. And I said, the kitchen goes on that end. And he said, yes. And I said, okay, so I think that floor joist is going to have to go down there. Yes. And all the time that I'm saying this and he's saying yes, his crew is nailing in floor joists. Boom, 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 boom. And they are going to it. And they're getting close to that one. And I finally had to, we had the plans. And I showed him the plans. Here's the plans right here. And here's where that double, yes. Yes, he says. Nods his head, yes. And so I took the plans, and what I finally did was I took the plans, and I stood him beside me, and I turned the plans around. And look over, and he goes, yes. And he turns around, you know. He turns around and yells at his guys. They moved the floor joist down, nailed it in. It was great. It was great communication, but it's also a great illustration. So often God is saying to us, you need to do this, and we're going, yes. Yes, and then God finally has to take our plans and turn them around and say, oh, okay, I had that backwards, didn't I? Yes. Being agreeable, saying yes, and we can sing that chorus, yes, Lord, yes, and we don't mean a word of it. We don't mean the yes, and we don't mean the Lord. The honest truth.
So we've seen three truths. First, opportunities usually come dressed as interruptions. Some challenges are beyond our control, and saying yes to an opportunity can lead to a miracle. Now we have 3 points of application. First, what good thing in your life is God wanting to replace with something better? Are you willing to let Him? Is your busyness a cover for faithlessness?
So here's an opportunity at the end of the service just for you to stop for a second. You can close your eyes if you want to, but you don't have to. Just don't start snoring. So this is an opportunity for you to think about how this affects me. So this okay. Ben's done a good job. Stan, not so much, but we're all right. We're at the end of it. But the question is, if you leave here and all you can say is, well, that was interesting. Never heard a sermon like that before, and you're going to miss the point. So we're going to take just a few minutes, and we're going to look at these applications. And there are questions for you to ask yourself. And the first one is this. Is there something good in your life that God wants to replace with something better? You see, they had wine to begin with. They had some resources, but their resources had run out. And they had to deal with that problem, right? What did they have? They had water. You got some water? In fact, that's how I titled this sermon, Got Water? Maybe you look at it and you think, all I got is water. Maybe that's all Jesus needs. When you take your resources and you give it to Him, Jesus not only made wine, and I'm not here to argue today about whether it was alcoholic or not. I think that's a wasteful argument. When you get to heaven, you can ask Him. All right? I want some of it when I'm in heaven, but when you get to heaven, you can ask. The reality is this. The quality of that was unsurpassed. Now it's interesting, isn't it? The Bible doesn't tell us that he turned the water into wine in the thing. It doesn't say that. It says he said to the serpents, dip some of that up and carry it. I don't know exactly when it turned into wine. I like to think, because our God is an awesome God, that it happened when the servants looked in there. Nope, that's still water, and I'm fixing to get myself in trouble. But I'm going to be obedient. And they said, here's a pitcher. There's water. Dun, 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 dun. Here's some wine. Can you imagine that servant is quivering a little bit? They've been obedient, but they have no power to change that from water. And then they poured it in a glass, and the servant's eyes looking at it. That doesn't look like water anymore. And the ruler of the feast takes a sip. And of course he had to be shaking when they called the master of the house over. He's thinking, I'm fixing to get fired. But he calls the master over and he says, look, dude, you've done this backwards, okay? What people usually do is when they come in and you want to impress people, you give them your very best right up front. You know? And after they've had that, then you give them the not so good stuff. But you've done this backwards. That first stuff was okay, but this is amazing. Now, if you want your life to go from water to amazing, there's only one guy who can do that. But you're going to have to let go of the good so that God can give you the better.
Second point is this. Have you faced your own inadequacy? What impossible need have you recently presented to God?
How long has it been since you got on your knees before God and said, I can't do that? That is how long it's been since you knew God's power in your life. I know us guys. I'm looking at some men out there. I'm looking at some manly men out there. And I know this. That is the hardest thing for a man to do. To look at the people in your life and say, I can't do that. I just can't do that. But yet, until we at least get to the point we can say that to God, we don't know what God wants to do. God will not overrule us in trying to ruin our lives. I didn't say run, I said ruin. If you want to ruin your life, God will let you. But the moment you come to him and say, I can't do this, man, that water is already starting to sparkle.
Finally, are you doing your part in the miracle?
So this is kind of that behind the scenes thing. It's the reason we brought the shoes in. I love these boots, by the way. That's probably what these people wore when they went to get water. Did the servants turn the water into wine? No. Could they turn the water into wine? No. They didn't have the power. But here's the thing. Wouldn't it have been crazy if Jesus had turned the well into wine? But he didn't. He could have, right? He turned the Nile River into blood. He can turn one well into wine. He didn't. They had to do their part. And we have to do ours. I don't know what it is for you. But you have to do what only you can do before God will do what only God can do. Ian, why don't you close us in prayer?
Father, help us not to get caught up in doing what we want to do with our lives. Help us not to get too busy to simply be obedient to you and to do the things that sometimes seem mundane or repetitive, but are good for us. Lord, help us not to shun the interruptions, but to let you interrupt our lives and to let things sometimes get out of our control and let you take over, Lord. Help us to recognize our own inadequacies and our own flaws and turn everything over to you. And just help us to always keep our eyes focused on you and to know that you are in control. We are not. Be with us all throughout the rest of this week. We love you in our faith. Amen.